This video is brought to you by Brilliant. 6 months or so ago, the UK economy was a mess. After Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget, the yield on a 10-year UK government bond quadrupled to over 4%. The Bank of England forecast the UK's longest ever recession, and the pound hit a record low of near parity against the dollar. At the time, basically every economic commentator was pessimistic about the UK, and there was even speculation that the country had regressed to something akin to an emerging market. However, it looks like investors have become a fair bit more optimistic since the Truss era. The pound has enjoyed a steady rally, and is now the best performing G10 currency this year. So in this video, we're going to look at the pound's recent rise, what's driving it, and what it tells us about the state of the UK economy. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with a quick recap of quite how dire the UK's economic situation became under Liz Truss. After her mini-budget, the pound nearly hit parity with the US dollar, down over 20% compared to the beginning of the year. Usually when an established currency depreciates in value, borrowing costs in that country go down, because it makes bonds issued in that currency cheaper. But the reverse happened in the UK. As the pound collapsed in value, UK borrowing costs actually went up. With the economic situation quickly deteriorating, and Liz Truss apparently unwilling to relent, there was even speculation that the pound could fall below the dollar, which would have been truly unprecedented. As we now know, this isn't what happened. Liz Truss resigned in disgrace after just 49 days in office, with the lowest approval rating of any Prime Minister since records began, and her successors, Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, quickly reversed the most controversial bits of her mini-budget. Nonetheless, whilst no one expected things to get much worse under Sunak, they didn't expect things to get that much better either. Growth was measly, inflation was sticky, and Sunak's preferred programme of what might be described as reheated Osborne-Cameron austerity has a pretty rubbish track record. However, in the past few months or so, the pound has enjoyed a surprising rally against both the dollar and the euro. For most of April, the pound has been trading at above $1.25 and is now the best performing G10 currency this year. So why is this? Why has the pound had such a good 2023? Well, as we see it, there are three main reasons. First, markets like Sunak more than Truss. Second, the Bank of England is raising interest rates higher and faster than other central banks, especially the Federal Reserve. And third, while the pound has risen, it was starting from such a low base that, well, it was hard for it to go anywhere else. Anyway, let's start with Sunak. For obvious reasons, the markets prefer Sunak to Truss, not just in substance, but also in tone. Even before he'd actually announced anything, the pound was on the up and government borrowing costs were falling, as the UK recovered from Truss's so-called moron premium and enjoyed Sunak's new dullness dividend. His new autumn statement was well received by markets, not least because it reversed most of the controversial bits of the mini-budget, and investors also apparently appreciate his more measured attitude to foreign policy, which is why the pound rallied when Sunak agreed a new Northern Ireland Protocol deal with the EU in February, which he successfully pushed through Parliament last month. It's also worth saying that, whilst Sunak's economic policies are hardly revolutionary, and the UK is still looking at a long period of stagnation, with the country now on track to outperform the most pessimistic forecasts. The Bank of England, for example, warned in early November that the UK was looking at a 2-year recession and nearly a doubling of the unemployment rate, but admitted in its most recent forecasts this March that it now expects unemployment to remain flat and GDP to remain stable in Q1 of 2023, before increasing slightly in Q2. You get the idea. Unsurprisingly, markets prefer Sunak to Truss, and it looks like his small c conservative economic agenda is outperforming expectations, even if that basically means narrowly avoiding a recession. The second reason is the interest rate differential between the Bank of England and other central banks. Basically, currencies usually appreciate when their central bank raises interest rates, because that makes it more attractive for investors to hold their savings in that country. When inflation is kicking up across the globe, as it did in 2022, this doesn't really matter because every central bank is raising interest rates. But at the moment, it looks like the Fed is going to cut rates whilst the Bank of England is going to continue to raise rates. This is because inflation in the US is lower than it is in the UK, and because the American banking system is under more stress than the British one, which will make the Federal Reserve think twice about tightening credit conditions any further. As things stand, the markets currently expect at least another 0.5% hike from the Bank of England this year, compared to at most a 0.25% hike from the Fed. And this difference in expectations partly explains why the pound has beaten the dollar recently. The third reason is that, well, the UK was starting from such a low base that it could only go up. It's worth remembering that, while we're all getting excited about the pound trading at $1.20, only a couple of years ago it was trading above $1.40. Similarly, while it's true that Sunak is outperforming expectations, that's in part because the expectations were absolutely rock bottom. That's not to downplay the magnitude of Sunak's achievement. After all, he did inherit arguably the worst economic crisis in the UK's recent history. But it's worth reminding ourselves of quite how far the Overton window has shifted in the past couple of years. On top of that, the UK is still looking at some pretty serious downside risks. While it's stabilised somewhat recently, the housing market is still looking a bit shaky. Consumer confidence is still low, and if that last year has taught us anything, it's that inflation isn't an easy problem to solve. It's also worth mentioning that, for some mysterious reason, the pound tends to perform best in April, before declining in the second half of the year. Nonetheless, we shouldn't get too doom and gloom. Even if risk remains, it's still true that the pound has outperformed expectations, and some analysts think its momentum could take it further. Nomura, NatWest and HSBC all see the pound reaching $1.30 in coming months. And this is good news for the UK. Not only is it a symptom of the UK's economic strength, at least relative to the Truss era, but a stronger currency should also help bring down inflation by making foreign imports cheaper. All in all, a rare spot of good economic news for a country that looked like an emerging market just a few months ago. These are all clearly huge decisions, but one much smaller, easier decision you can make is improving your skills and career prospects with Brilliant.org. That's because, while we all know that the promise of AI is that it'll make our lives easier, it's very possible it'll make our work lives more difficult, replacing some people and requiring different skills of others. Brilliant, however, is the best way of improving your STEM skills quickly and in a fun way, investing in your own human intelligence. That's because Brilliant has thousands of lessons, from foundational and advanced maths to AI, data science, neural networks, decision-making and more, with new lessons added monthly. And by the way, these lessons are interactive and engaging, designed around principles of active learning, so there's no boring lectures here. That means that by investing a few minutes every day in lifelong learning, you can improve your skills and feel a real sense of accomplishment. You can try everything Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days by clicking on the link in the description. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support and for watching TLDR.